A sculpture is an artistic form in which hard or plastic materials are worked into three-dimensional art objects. The designs may be embodied in freestanding objects, in reliefs on surfaces, or in environments ranging from tableaus to contents that envelop the spectator. An enormous variety of media may be used, including clay, wax, stone, metal, fabric, glass, wood, plaster, rubber, and random found objects. Materials may be carved, modeled, molded, cast, wrought, welded, sewn, assembled, or otherwise shaped and combined. Sculpture is not a fixed term that applies to a permanently circumscribed category of objects or set of activities. It is rather the name of an art that grows and changes and is continually extending the range of its activities and evolving new kinds of objects. The scope of the term was much wider in the second half of the 20th century than it had been only 2 or 3 decades before, and in fluid state of the visual arts at the turn of the 21st century, nobody can predict what its future extensions are likely to be. An ivory statuette from the Paleolithic period dating back to around 35,000 BC is one of the oldest sculptures ever discovered. Discovered in a cave in Hollenstein-Stadel, Germany in 1939, it was carved out of a mammoth tusk called Lauenmensch, German term for lion human. It is about 12 inches tall and depicts a human figure with a feline face. It has been estimated that the carving using primitive flint tools likely took more than 350 hours to complete. Because tribes of the time lived on the edge of subsistence, spending such an extended amount of time in making this statuettes suggest it must have been an important artifact, may be used for shamanistic ritual to care protection for the tribe or ensure a good hunt. The Great Sphinx in Egypt is probably one of the world's most famous sculptures. In opposite fashion to the Lowenman statuette, the Sphinx features instead the head of a human on a body of a lion. Originally carved out of a limestone bedrock, the Sphinx measures 65 feet high and 240 feet long. It has been restored using stone blocks. Some historians believe that the head is of the pharaoh Khafra, though generally thought to date back about 2500 BC. Evidence of water erosion suggests it might possibly be much older. In ancient Greek art, there's a little distinction between the sacred and the secular. The Greek gods were thought to have human form, thus the human form was considered to be the most important subject in Greek art. In sculpture, the early Greeks followed the Egyptian format very closely, carving very stiff, blocky figures in stone. During the early classical period of the 4th and the 5th centuries BC, and transitioning into the Hellenistic period, sculptures began to break away from the rigid Egyptian influence model. Sculpture began to take on a much more realistic natural look, with marble or bronze, not stone, the favored medium. By the beginning of the 15th century, the Renaissance ushered in an eclectic study of the humanities, including science, astronomy, and mathematics. Artists began to revisit the thoughtful and dignified perfection of the classical times. The invention of printing press propagated these ideas, and artists began to show more interest in a scientific approach to reality. The Renaissance masters, including Donatello, Michelangelo, Raphael, and Leonardo da Vinci, were figureheads of the times. Donatello was an Italian sculptor who worked in Florence in the mid-15th century. Leonardo da Vinci was a student of Donatello and one of the most famous artists of all time. Michelangelo was born in 1475, a genius and true Renaissance man. One of Michelangelo's first sculptures was Madonna in Child, completed when he was only 16. In the 19th and the 20th centuries, the art world reflected the rapid-fire changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution. Instead of focusing on perfect anatomy, details, and storytelling, artists began to pay more attention to what they perceive below the surface. Personal expressions and style took on greater importance in creating truer rendition of reality. August Rodin is one of the most famous sculptors of the time and is considered the father of modern sculpture. A variety of art movements occurred during the modernist movement of the early 20th century. Cubism, Dadaism, Surrealism, pop art, minimalism, and futurism all came about during this period.
Modeled sculpture. Modeling is a sculpture technique meaning to shape a pliable material. Clay and wax are the most common modeling materials, and the artist's hands are the main tools, though metal and wood implements are often employed in shaping. Casted sculpture. A sculpture made by pouring liquid materials into a mold. This technique is called casting. To copy a solid object, you need to pour a liquid such as melted metal, clay, wax, or plaster into a mold and let it harden. The mold is then removed and a copy or cast is left in the shape of the mold. Carved sculpture. Carved sculpture are made using tools to shape something from a material by scraping away portions of that material. There are many materials that can be used in carving, such as fruits, stones, ivory, wood, and etc. Assembled sculpture. Assembled sculptures are made by assembling a variety of materials and make a composition out of them. These materials can be wood, paper, metal, and other objects. It is also referred to as a 3D version of a collage.
First sculptor is Napoleon Isabelo Veloso Abueva. He was born on January 26, 1930. He is more popularly known as Napoleon Abueva. He is a sculptor given the distinction as the Philippine National Artist for Sculpture. He is also entitled as the father of modern Philippine sculpture. His works include the sculpture. Second is Arturo R. Luz. He was born on November 20, 1926. He is a Philippine National Artist Awardee in Visual Arts. He is also known as printmaker, sculptor, designer, and art administrator. His best masterpieces are minimalist geometric abstracts alluding to the modernist virtues of competence, order, and elegance. Third is Guillermo Estrella Tolentino. He was born on July 24, 1890. He was designated as a National Artist of the Philippines for Sculpture in 1973. His notable works are Bonifacio Monument and UP Oblation. Fourth is Abdulmari Asia Imao. He was born on January 14, 1936. He was named National Artist of the Philippines for Sculpture in 2006. As a tausug, Imao is the first Moro to receive the recognition. His works includes Industry Brass Mural, mural relief on filmmaking, industrial mural, and Zulu warriors. Fifth is Eduardo de los Santos Castrillo. He was born on October 31, 1942. He was known for sculpture, artist, and movement. His most important works are monumental sculptures commemorating Filipino historical events or personalities, including Raha Sulaiman in 1976 and the People Power Monument. Next is Solomon Saprid. He was born on 1917. He is a multi-awarded artist in Philippine modern and contemporary art. His notable works are Tikbalang and Gombursa. And last is Isabelo Tampinco. He was born on November 19, 1850. He is one of the greatest Filipino wood sculptors. He was known as Tampinco frames, including the facade of the Manila Cathedral, the high relief on the Molavedor of the Santo Domingo Church in Quezon City.
Elements of sculptural design. The two principal elements of sculpture are mass and space. Mass refers to the sculpture's bulk, the solid bit contained within its surfaces. Space is the air around the solid sculpture and reacts with the latter in several ways. First, it defines the edges of the sculpture. Second, it can be enclosed by parts of the sculpture, forming hollows and areas of emptiness. And lastly, it can link separate parts of the sculpture which does relate to one another across the space. Works of sculpture can be assessed and differentiated according to their treatment of these two elements. For instance, some sculptors focus on the solid components of their sculpture, while others are more concerned with how it relates to the space on which it sits. Another important element of sculptures are their surfaces. These can produce quite different visual effects according to whether they are convex or concave, flat or modeled, and colored or uncolored. For example, convex surfaces express contentment, satiety, internal pressure, and general fullness, while concave surfaces suggest external pressure, an inner insubstantiality, and possible collapse. Then again, a flat surface carries no suggestion of three-dimensionality, while a modeled surface, the one that contains light shadow catching ridges or halos, can convey strong effects of 3D forms emerging from or retreating into darkness. And for color, it can obviously endow a surface with differing attributes of texture, proportion, depth, and shape. Next is principles of sculptural design. This regulates the approach of sculptors to such matters as orientation, proportion, scale, articulation, and balance. First in line is the orientation. It is important to create a sense of harmony in the sculpture itself, or between parts of it, or between the sculpture and the viewer, or between the sculpture and its surroundings. The sculptors usually work at a particular spatial plan or scheme of reference. For instance, the poses of human figures are typically calculated and created with reference to the four cardinal planes, namely the principle of axiality. Next is proportion. It is how sculptors handle proportionality varies considerably. Other sculptors have followed more naturalistic but equally iconometric rules of proportion. For example, a human statue mounted on the top of a tall structure may require a larger upper body to balance the effect of foreshortening when viewed from the ground level. Scale. This refers, for example, to the need to create a sculpture in tune with the scale of its surroundings. Walk around any major Gothic cathedral and observe the great variety of scale of the sculpture which decorate the doorways, facades, and other surfaces. Second to the last is the articulation. This describes how sculptural figures are jointed, either how different parts of a body merge in a single form or how separate sections come together. Lastly, balance. In freestanding figurative sculpture, balance involves two principal matters. First, the sculptural body must be physically stable. Easy enough to achieve in crawling or reclining figure, less easy in standing statue, especially if leaning forwards or backwards. If naturally unstable, a base must be used. Second, from compositional viewpoint, the statue must project a sense of dynamic and static equilibrium. Without such harmony, beauty is almost impossible to achieve. Mediums. Almost any materials capable of being shaped in 3 dimensions can be used in sculpting. But some materials like stones, especially hard limestones, woods, clays, metals, ivories, and plasters have exceptional plastic attributes and have therefore proved most popular to sculptors from prehistoric times onward. As a result, for most of its history, sculpture has been created using 4 basic methods: stone carving, wood carving, bronze casting, and clay firing. Stone. Stone sculpture probably the earliest form of monumental sculpture as well as the best medium for monumental works. In addition, it was very common to many eras of Paleolithic Stone Age. Wood. Wood carving is the oldest and most continuous type of sculpture, especially convenient for small works. Wood carving was widely practiced during the prehistoric age and later during the era of early Christian sculpture. Bronze. Sculpting in bronze is a complicated process which was developed independently in China, South America, and Egypt. Bronze casting requires the modeling of a form in clay, plaster, or wax, which was later removed after the molten bronze has been poured. The lost wax method was a common technique during the Renaissance era. Clay. Sculpting in clay dates from Paleolithic era of the Stone Age, known as terracotta sculpture. It is the most plastic of all sculpting methods. Versatile, light, inexpensive, and durable. Although clay mainly used for primarily models, later cast in bronze and carved in stones, it has also been used to produce full-scale sculptures.